Hey you guys, welcome back to my channel. It's your girl Najwa. I'm so happy you're here. So we need to review Cleopatra. It was so good. So if you guys have followed my channel, you know that I also did a review for Njinga, which was also produced by Jada Pinkett Smith. So if you haven't checked that out, check it out, because essentially, from my understanding, Cleopatra is basically a part of the same kind of series, this African Queen series. And guys, it is so good. It is so good. It is so good. And you know, looking at these projects and initiatives and pieces of work that are coming out, these oeuvres, as we'd say in French, these oeuvres. It really is educating people, because we do live in such a time right now where you know, people are concerned that DEI and teaching history as it is, acknowledging slavery and the impacts that it has today, people are like coming from this individualist place, and they're like individualistic, and they're like, you know, we shouldn't be judged. I think it wasn't McCarthy, it was the other guy, I can't think of his name, one of those crazy extremist guys in the US, who said, you know, white people don't want to be judged for what, you know, people 2 generations did ago, and I'm sure black people don't want to be judged for what people 2 generations did ago. And if you think of things from that standpoint, you are just exposing yourself to be extremely ignorant, because, you know, if you look at every single institution, every single piece of history today, it's founded upon our ancestors. It's founded upon what has happened in the past. Take a look at the Bible. Take a look at the Crusades. You know, take a look at the Spanish Inquisition. Take a look at the Industrial Revolution. To say that, oh, we shouldn't consider the past, it's just like absolutely ignorant. But we know that those people are not saying that because that's what they truly believe. Some of them truly believe it, but mostly it's for extremely rich patrons extremely rich politicians who have extremely rich patrons who are funding their careers. And what's so sad is that people think that these extremely divisive people are advocating for their best interests, but really they're just using them. And I hope that America, but as well as the Western world in general, is waking up to that. You know, you cannot erase history. You cannot erase slavery. Something that I loved about Cleopatra, guys, because you know that I studied art history in my undergraduate, and eventually I changed it was my minor, and eventually I changed my minor to illustration. But for the first year, I was actually studying art history, and so I had most of a concentration on 17th and 18th century art, but I also did study Eastern art. And you know, I think I told you guys in another video, the art history world and the art criticism world is very clear in letting you know that when you consider African art, people just automatically say, oh, Egyptian art, and that's it. That's the extent of what most traditional art history classes cover in as far as Eastern art, considering Africa. But we of course know that Africa is so much more vast than just Egypt. It doesn't just end with Egypt. And Cleopatra is a part of the Ptolemy dynasty, you know, and the Ptolemy dynasty is a mixture of European ancestry along with African ancestry. And it's how do I want to say this? It's believed, it's believable to understand that some of that ancestry would have come from other parts of Africa, not just Egypt. It would have come from Central Africa, would have come from South Africa. We know that Akhenaten's mother was a black woman. Akhenaten, another pharaoh from Egypt, his mother was a like legitimately dark black woman. And there were people even in Egypt who are dark black. But history always tries to make Cleopatra and Nefertiti seem extremely Eurocentric. You know, if you think back on films in the past when they approached Cleopatra and Nefertiti, they were played by white women. They were played by Elizabeth Taylor and Angelina Jolie, and Nothing against those actresses. I love both Elizabeth Taylor and Angelina Jolie equally. But it's a part of a whitewashing of history, and this show addresses that wonderfully. So, of course, you can expect that the extreme far right saw this and they hate it. They want history to continue to be whitewashed, erased, and not really told as it really was. Oftentimes, people show Cleopatra to be this, like, brazen Jezebel, you know, the succubus, which of course history does that to women all the time, but the show addresses really well that she was a strategist, you know, she was a strategist, she was extremely intelligent. Her alliance with both Julius Caesar and Mark Antony wasn't necessarily just she's a succubus and she's, you know, seducing these European men to get some political gain. I mean, she was definitely a pragmatist, but there was also love. She didn't just have a cold heart, you know. This was a woman who really, at the end of the day, her interest was her people, you know. And that, I feel like, is when you look at Octavius, the show shows really, really well. And it's got, you know, another reason why you can understand probably why it had a lot of criticism is primarily the art historians who are speaking on the show are women. Okay, and that doesn't surprise me at all, because whenever I look at, you guys know I'm a huge art history nerd, whenever I look at documentaries about Henry VIII or the Mad King Charles or, you know, whoever it is, it's usually men. It's usually male historians who are talking about those male figures within history. But when it's women, we usually gravitate towards that. And I think that if women actually watch this, a lot of women will really, really gravitate towards Cleopatra, especially the way she's portrayed in this. Liv from Skins is in here. You know, it's got an amazing cast. Even though it's a documentary type style thing, the storyline, the actors is wonderful. I love the classical, ancient classical attire. You know, the costume work is so beautiful. I love being immersed in stuff like that. The makeup, you know, of these beautiful palettes of gold and blue. I love the fact that they show Cleopatra as a black woman. You know, she's got coarse hair. She's got tight curls, you know, as opposed to the way that history has continued to try to portray her as a white woman with a tan. I love the fact that they're like, no, this is an African woman, this is an African queen. It's just another attempt to continue to make it seem like Africa didn't have really an established civilization before you know, European colonization. But something I'm going to talk about in another video, because this is something I can't hold my tongue on any longer. You know, specifically in the U.S., but I would have an inkling that it's probably happening in the UK as well. Men are not going to university. Men are not going to university. They're not entering into higher education. They're not, they don't have religion like they had even 10 years ago, let alone 50 years ago. And there's this huge anger. There's this huge anger from genders, you know, specifically this more male rights, incel type community, saying, oh, well, we don't have any representation, and when I go to get a job, some, you know, affirmative action hire gets the job that I want. But at the same time, men are going to school. The reason you don't see many male historians in this show is because men aren't pursuing higher education anymore. So I really, it's time to talk about this. So literally right after I film this video, I'm going to film another video because I found some really interesting articles talking about this. Anywho, you know, despite what you guys may have been hearing out there, because it took me a bit of a while. Okay, let me just caveat with saying this. I saw buzz about Cleopatra on Netflix, on the internet, before I even watched it. Long before, like a couple weeks or a month. I think it's been out for at least a month or something like that. And it just was so negative, you know? Like, I feel like for maybe like 4 or 5 years, I really didn't catch on to what was going on. When I would see all of this negative trolling of different television shows that always were ironically either produced by people of color or women, or, you know, people of color or women had like a very, very active role in it, I would just see all of this negativity on the internet, and I would just sort of like not think anything much of it, because you have to understand, I mean, I was born in 91, so literally 2009, between the time I graduated high school and 2015, right before Donald Trump became president. He's not president anymore. You know, technology had a huge incline. It just really, really exploded. And for those first few years where the internet was really coming of age, cyberbullying, trolling, you know, negativity, bigotry devices, you know, bigotry that's masked as something else, because, you know, they never ever completely confront race in this. It's about something else, you know, but of course, as you go and you think a little bit more critically, it's about race, you know, it's about gender. But after, like, in these past 2 years, a kind of light bulb went off that, oh wait, no, all of these things aren't terrible. All of these things aren't necessarily of poor quality or not accurate. People are just being swayed by this divisive culture of polarization. So I knew it. I knew it as soon as I saw buzz on Twitter, on Instagram, on YouTube. Oh, Cleopatra is terrible. You know what? It's amazing. And those people who are just dismissing it like that, I guarantee you, they didn't go to university. They didn't study art history in school. They aren't reading about this stuff. You know, if you were, and if you really, really had an anti-racist soul, spirit, you know, approach of things, you would see this is something that is so important. You know, explaining our history truly as it is. If we can explain the history of Queen Elizabeth I and Queen Victoria and Henry VIII and you know, Edward V and King Arthur, if we can explain those histories as they were, you know, also fraught with depression, with espionage, with war, if we can explain those as they were, why can't we explain African history and African civilization, African queens, African kings as they were? You know, it's just like, anyway. But I won't speak too much to the storyline. You guys you gotta go watch it. You gotta go watch it. The woman who plays Cleopatra is amazing. You know, so basically, she is born to the crown. Her father shows a great inclination towards her. You know, usually in Ptolemaic dynasties, you know, it's not necessarily always the girls who are going to get handed the crown. And sometimes that's going to be under certain circumstances. She might have to marry her brother, in which Cleopatra does. She actually marries her brother. Sibling rivalry was very, very real, you know, and in the Ptolemaic and sort of the Pharaoh dynasties of the ancient East. And, you know, we have to think of these with a lens of back then. It seems kind of brutal when you think about it, and it is brutal, but that's quite literally just, that's what it was. To think about the fact that this is the ancient world and so many things are booming, you know, mathematics is booming, language is booming, trade, you know, trade, the alliances between Rome and Egypt is really based around the resources that it has. And it is not surprising at all to see years and years and years down the road that many European countries infiltrated into Africa to get those resources, because Africa is a place of rich resources. Something that is noted about Cleopatra that I think is a wonderful parallel of the day and age that we live in now is that she really worked from her heart for her people. And you see something similar with Julius Caesar, you know? And there are also politicians out there. You know, politics don't change. This is something from centuries ago. And at the same time, it's like the more things change, the more they stay the same. There are those politicians who in their heart, they feel deeply for their people. There are people who are born leaders because they want to get in the trenches alongside people and help get the work done. There are other leaders who just want power. They just want money. They just want fame. They just want resources. And you see that dichotomy between Cleopatra and Julius Caesar. Although Julius Caesar had his faults, he truly cared about Rome. You see that parallel between she and Julius Caesar and Octavius, for example. Something really interesting is caracalla, at least to my understanding, Caracalla was a descendant of Cleopatra. And so it can be, and Caracalla is Roman, and that just shows the wonderful melange of European and African ancestry, especially when people are, the people who are like, black power. It's like, if you look somewhere down the road, you're going to find African ancestry. And if you're looking from a truly, what I find so fascinating about art history, I know I'm like not even pausing to breathe, but this is why I studied art history in the first place, because when you actually really get into it, it is so interesting, and you see the traces of human and the human anthology completely, within these stories, within this historical facts. When you look back, so from a sociological standpoint, we all came out of Africa. The only reason that race exists, which you look at things like the 1619 Project, and you look at the American South and how this whole sort of white supremacy movement came to life, I feel a lot of those people weren't necessarily looking at the history of man, because the history of man is traced back to Africa. It's all traced back to Africa. And the reason that these races exist, which the only country in the world that truly emphasized race to the extent that it has was the United States, particularly the American South. Even myself being from Birmingham, Alabama, it truly was created as a divisive tool to enslave black people, to keep black people, caught in this cycle of poverty, quite literally to treat black people like they were subhuman, like they weren't completely human. It was white people in America, particularly the racist American South, like particularly, the Confederacy. That's what I was trying to think of. Particularly the Confederacy, like a lot of the definitions of race, the fact that in the U.S. race is on all standardized tests, it's on, when you go to the bank to get a loan, it's everywhere, even me, I'm American, but I live in France. My husband is Portuguese. I've been to Portugal several times. Race is just not a thing like that. Even though racism might exist in those places in Europe, it's just not ingrained in every single thing. America created that for a reason. It was to make classes. It was to classify between people. But we are all one race, the human race. And literally, the human race sprung up out of Africa. And the people that you see of European ancestry quite literally just migrated out of Africa, and they adapted over, of course, centuries and centuries and millennia adapted to their environments, and that's why they have less melanin in their skin. That's why they have lighter eye colors. That's why they have smoother hair. But if they look back at their ancestry, we all come from Africa. And so looking at the histories between Cleopatra and Mark Antony, study your art, study your history, guys, because it's really, really insanely interesting when you look into it. You can see the traces of our ancestors. You can see that we truly are descendants of those Neanderthals, of those Homo sapiens. And I won't go too deeply into it, but looking at this show, you can truly see how this is the ancient world. This is the ancient world that sprung apart from Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, and to become the Homo sapiens that we are today. You can see how our civilization sort of developed to have bartering and marketing and exports and imports. It's just really, really wonderful to look at it. But you also see that dynamic of the leader, the politician who truly cares about their people, and the politician that's in it for power. Cleopatra was in it for her people, and for that reason, even though she was a woman, which Egypt has many forgotten pharaohs who were women, but even for Cleopatra, her brother, there's this rivalry between her brother husband. That sounds so redneck. That sounds so Birmingham, Alabama. No, I'm just kidding. I don't want to offend any of my countrymen. Just kidding. But anyway, even with her brother husband, he's approaching this. Actually, her brother husband is being influenced by the eunuchs in his life. So, of course, again, it's always about power. It's never about the people. And Cleopatra is more popular. Why? Because she actually has a truly ardent passion for people, for all of her people, you know, and that clearly shows through with her alliances with Rome. I really liked of course, I'm a woman, so I mean, I don't know. I'm a woman, and I can recognize attractive people. Of course, I love the dynamic between Julius Caesar and Cleopatra in the show. Of course, they make it as tantalizing and romantic and, you know, sexy as they can. I love the historians. You know, they really got great historians from Africa, from Britain, from the U.S. I mean, like, and they, like I said, strong, amazing women. You know, a lot of these historians are women, and not because men have been excluded from this thing, but you know, men aren't going after art history. They aren't going after education. Period. So, if you guys want to be mad about something or not having representation, go to school, put your head down, and do your work. It's so funny to see sort of the misogynistic elements in here as well. It's funny to see how people don't want to take Cleopatra seriously in Rome. You know, that right there paralleled against, you guys know, the things that I talk about with the Sussexes here about Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. People might not understand it, but they do have unconscious bias when it comes to Meghan Markle because she is a Black American woman married into this traditionally super white royal family. And as much as people like to deny it, you know, the UK, Netherlands, Portugal, Spain, Italy, they all have roots in this sort of trying to sort of declassify themselves from their Black or African or whatever counterparts. It can be unconscious. It really can be unconscious, but I think people are not willing to accept that. And so when Cleopatra goes to Rome, Julius Caesar loves the fact that she's like a strong woman, that she has a great sense of humor, the fact that she is an amazing politician. Most of their relationship comes from the fact that they recognize how intelligent and pragmatic and committed to their countries that they are. They both see that, and that is what really sparks the fire between them. And the other Romans see that, and that is not okay with them. The other Romans see that, and this idea of what a Roman chaste woman is a woman who stays at home, a woman who doesn't speak, a woman who doesn't ruffle anybody's feathers, you know. And so the Romans see that, and it's not okay. And what happens? Julius Caesar gets stabbed like 1 billion times, you know? We've all seen this in the art history world where the other senators just come up and they're all stabbing Julius Caesar. It's the same thing. You know, the UK doesn't want to accept with Meghan Markle and stuff that this has roots and this tension and this animosity that has existed between, you know, European nations and African nations for a very, very long time. They don't want to admit that, but it's there. Meghan Markle is an outspoken, creative, you know, independent woman, and she's coming into a traditional culture where women are supposed to be chaste, understated, silent, you know. As much as people will say it's not about race, it's not about race, it's not about race, inherently it is, and that's what history teaches us. So that was wonderful. Like this, I hope that the art history world takes note and that it continues to sort of advocate for history to be told the way that it really was, the way that it really shows its hand in our day to day. I also really like the element of the geography. It really goes deeply into the geography of the times, you know, looking at Egypt and Syria and Rome and Greece. You know, it has that historical and geographical element, and I think that's really nice. I love the sort of, because growing up, when I've always been a nerd, and history has always been something that's really interested me. Even when I was like 9, 10, I used to watch a lot of PBS growing up. And if you guys remember those old documentaries on PBS, you know, it would be similar to this. This is just sort of like a new age take on what has been the standard for a very long time. It's a combination of art historians giving their testimonies and providing information, their expertise, plus a little bit of, you know, live action sort of acting, you know, from the actors who are actually portraying what's happening. And then there's things like maps and charts and graphics that explain the sort of statistical or quantitative or qualitative side of the things. And, it never, technology and entertainment, film, writing, it never ever ceases to amaze me over the years how it develops more and more and more and more. Jada Pinkett knew that this is something I need to get my hands on. And the haters are going to hate, but, we have to keep advocating for more stuff like this to happen. I would take Cleopatra any day over Queen Charlotte and Lord Danbury. Lord Danbury, you guys know how I feel. Anyway, I love seeing black people's portrayed in the beautiful, powerful, innovative ways that we are. History for so long has tried to diminish us, but I really, really love that we see this. And I love that they show that just as in the ancient world, as it is today, many times that is just too much. That is just too much for oftentimes people of European descent. But you know what? I want to go ahead and say it's not just people of European descent. It is power. Power and greed knows no color. Capitalism, corruption knows no color, because you see her siblings also trying to come after Cleopatra. You see her siblings trying to get after her, take her crown and all of that stuff. And so, you know what? That's something. I mean, I feel like, colorism, othering is such a huge part of this whitewashing of history, of this polarization that we have seen back in the ancient world as well as we see today. But I also believe that on the other end of it, even though we cannot talk about the stuff without talking about systemic racism, systemic misogyny, all of that, we do also know that color, power, greed, all of those negative things, they know no color. You see Cleopatra's own family coming after her. It's something really interesting also because the Ptolemies, like we said, had European ancestry. The Ptolemies came from Greece and colonized Egypt, and so there's this melange, this mixture of Egyptian culture with Greek culture, and so they literally are basically mixed race people. They're basically mixed race people, and they've had to be brutal. They've had to be brutal to fight for their power and their authority in Egypt. But I love how that again is paralleled with Cleopatra's true love for the Egyptian people. You even see in one scene where she goes, when she is crowned, she goes into the streets, and one of her servants is like, "Ugh, it stinks, I don't want to be here, why are we doing this, we don't have to do this," and Cleopatra's like, "These are my people." If politicians looked at that a little bit more and really truly worked for their heart, advocated for the people and the voices of the people, I think all in all they likely would see more success. But again, greed, power, that sees a true leader. It sees someone who actually truly cares about the interest of all the people in a nation, in a civilization, in a country, in a city, whatever it may be. And that gross negligence of power, that gross sort of corruption and greed or whatever it is, it wants to take that leadership down. And you see that. You see that Cleopatra has children with, she has one child with Julius Caesar, and he never claims her child. So as much as we want to talk about how Julius Caesar was a great leader, and he was willing to lay with Cleopatra, but not willing to claim her child. And so later on with Mark Antony, after Julius Caesar has passed, of course we know that Cleopatra had Mark Antony finally acknowledge that she was a pharaoh, and that's often, we saw the same thing with Njinga. Njinga's like, acknowledge that I'm a queen. Acknowledge that I'm a queen. If it was between Rome and France, for example, and there was the Queen of France, and the Queen of France is like, you need to acknowledge that I'm queen, it'd be like, no question. But because it's African, they don't want to acknowledge the black queen. It wasn't until near Njinga's death that the Roman Catholic Church finally acknowledged that she was queen. Same thing with Cleopatra. They don't want to acknowledge her majesty. They don't want to acknowledge her authority or her as a monarch, And so Mark Antony, I think, truly loves her on a deeper level than Julius Caesar did. But at the same time, I think the show is really great at portraying that Mark Antony had some weaknesses. He had some insecurities. You see that he goes into depression. You see that he struggles with alcohol. And during that, Cleopatra is truly supporting him. you see that he marries Octavius's sister, for power. So it shows in a subtle way, but at the same time a very marked way, that the Roman Empire is truly wrapped up in this power dynamic. Power is so important there. Octavius would be that politician who is driven by power and greed. He's not that person who is driven by the alliance, because at this point there is an alliance between Egypt and Rome. An alliance that, if cultivated the right way, could have been wonderful, but it wasn't. We see how it ended. And after Cleopatra dies, her son, what was his name? Caesarion gets executed. He gets executed when he's still a baby, when he's 17 years old, and her other children just sort of disappear. So we do know that Caracalla was a descendant, so clearly, her children did go on to live some sort of life out after the passing of Cleopatra and Mark Antony. It even talks about how Shakespeare sort of also waters down this thing. It talks about the carpet, how this theory that Cleopatra was rolled into Julius Caesar's room in a carpet. It approaches all of those kind of wacky things where they attempted to diminish Cleopatra as some sort of succubus, Jezebel, whatever. And I really, really like that. It comes to a terrible demise. Mark Antony dies, and Cleopatra takes her own life so that she can die on her own terms. She knew that she was likely to be executed, so she took her life so that she could go out on her own terms. Beast move, we talk about the OG bossery, but her legacy lives on. You can clearly see that her legacy lives on because we are still talking about her today. You look at people who history, particularly people of color, who and women who what that history has tried so hard to erase. It doesn't work that way. You see my video about how there was actually all of this racism on the set of Lost, my favorite show, and yet they wanted to limit the people of color who were the writers on that show to not write too many scenes where the people of color on the actual show were the heroes. They wanted to sort of silence those people of color on the show. But then, the most loved storylines from Lost are from Sun and Jin, are from Michael, are from Mr. Echo, so it just goes to show you, stop doing it. Maybe just stop trying to silence people of color and women, and, because, okay, I mean, we know that she died. We know that her legacy lives on. We know that there was civil war. Same thing over and over again. But let's talk about this. Just to wrap up, I do have to say that you look at this and you know that if this was just approached in a different way, if the alliance between Rome and Egypt was cultivated in a way that was founded on diplomacy and peace and understanding and recognition and empathy and compassion, maybe we would be in a better place in society today, and we keep having those opportunities to come from a place of compassion, of diplomacy, of unity. We keep having those opportunities, but often greed, power, it gets in the way of those things. I think now in this day and age, we're better at recognizing which of those leaders are there to advocate for the people, and which of those leaders are there for power, for greed, for money, for classism, whatever it is. I think that these stories of Julius Caesar and Cleopatra and Elizabeth's first, even up to the things that we look at today, what's happening in the U.S. between Congress and the Senate, the DOJ and the President, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. We look at what's happening in the UK with the Tories and the Labour Party, with Boris Johnson, with the monarchy, with the Sussexes, with Prince William and Kate Middleton. We look at what's happening in Yemen and Sudan and Russia and Ukraine. We keep having these opportunities to take a look at our anthology as humans, and to learn from it and grow from it. And I think that we have grown from it. If you ever get really down and out about the world today and you get really depressed, just go and look at history, because history is brutal. It's brutal, you know, and I would like to say that we've moved forward. Even though that hate, that violence, you know, that civil unrest, it still does brew beneath everything that is, because that is human nature, you know. We've said, you look at the Bible, and there is the part of the Bible where Jesus, you know, for me as a Catholic, you know, I grew up Muslim, but I'm a Catholic, and it took me a lot to get to the Catholic Church. I actually practiced a liberal Christianity for a very long time. But I wanted something that really had more of an emphasis on the scripture and from a place of tradition, long tradition, with some very simple parameters. And Catholicism was that for me. It doesn't have to be that for everyone. And people might argue, hey, the Catholic Church is riddled with corruption, with greed, with power, with violence and abuse. But that was those people. It wasn't the religion itself. The religion itself is beautiful. And Jesus says, before he knows he's about to die, at the hands of people similar to this guy Octavius, you know, he knows he's about to die, and he says, this wine is my blood, you know, this bread is my body. And when you drink and eat of those things, you know, we are one single body in the Catholic Church, one single body in Christ and God. And that right there, that unity, is something that we have the ability to work towards. But history is often riddled with those, and even if you are looking at that from an atheistic standpoint, even if you're looking at that from, you know, just unity from a completely secular point, we as human beings, we have to work together in order to accomplish something, and that's what these sort of stories teach. So thank you, Jada Pinkett. Thank you, Netflix. You know, thank you all the amazing actors that worked on this. I loved it. 10 out of 10. I would love to know what you guys think. Let me know in the comments. If you watched it, what did you think? And again, if you're new to this channel, hit the like and subscribe button, hit the bell so you know whenever I post a video, and I'll see you guys next time. Okay, bye. Bye.